Hi Year 10, today we are looking at describing probability. So to start us off, we've got our 6 question starter at the front. You need to pause the video and have a go at all 6 of these questions, and then unpause it when you're finished with a red pen to mark the work you've done. Okay, so you should have had a go at all 6 of these questions. With a red pen in your hand, could you mark the work you've done, tick them if they're right, change them if they're wrong? If at any point in the lesson you need a bit more time to copy something down, just feel free to pause the video and get it down on the piece of paper you're working on. Remember, we are going to hole punch these and put them in their folders when we come back, so every note you make is important. Keep them safe, keep them ready to go in your folder for the future. Okay, so today we are looking at using language and different numbers to describe probability. So we're not really using any kind of mathematical application. We're just going to look at what probability means and get a general vague concept of what probability looks like. So a lot of this will be quite intuitive and you'll know it already, but it gives us a really good foundation to work on when we start going on to a little bit more difficult probability things. So what I want you to do is to copy down these sentences onto the piece of paper you're working on. Leave some blank gaps for where I've got some blank gaps, because you're going to have a go at filling these in yourself, and then you're going to have a look at the right answers and correct them in red pen if they're different, but have a go and guess if you can fill in any of these blank bits now. Okay, so you should have copied down all of these sentences and filled in the gaps. So you're going to check if you got the right answer. So all probabilities are between two different numbers, and these are 0 and 1. An event that has a probability of 0 is an impossible event. So that means if it's got a 0 probability, it's never going to happen. On the other hand, if an event has a probability of 1, it is a certain event. So that means no matter what you do, that is always going to be the outcome of that event. So if we're talking about a fair possible outcomes, so for example flipping a coin is a fair experiment, we only have 2 outcomes, and if it's a fair coin they are equally as likely, we can calculate the probability of events using the following formula. So the probability of an event happening, so for example let's say a fair coin landing on heads, we put the number of successes, so in this case we consider getting a header success, over the number of total outcomes. So for flipping a fair coin, we know there are 2 total outcomes, which are heads and tails. So if we know there is 1 success, flipping a head, and 2 total outcomes, my probability for getting a head is a half. Obviously this is quite intuitive as what we know a coin's probability is going to be, but when we look at some slightly difficult ones, this becomes a good formula to use. Okay, so to start off with, we're going to use some language to describe numerical probability. So we spoke a little bit before about how a probability of 1 is a certain event and 0 is an impossible event. So to start us off, I'm just going to highlight those and match those up now rather than messing around and writing things down. So we've got impossible to 0, and we've got certain as 1. Now the closer a number is to 1, that means the more likely it is it's going to happen. So for example for 0.81, I'm going to put this as my likely event. The closer it is to 0 is going to be an unlikely event. So for example I've got 0.2 as my unlikely event. Now an even chance has to be 0.5 exactly, because it means there is a 50-50 chance of it happening. So even chance has to be a 0.5 probability. Now we can put these probabilities on a scale, so we're always going to go between 0 and 1, it can't be outside of those bounds. The closer it is to 0, as I said before, is less likely. The closer it is to 1 is more likely. And there's a point on the spectrum where it goes from unlikely to likely, and at that point we have even chance. So I'm not going to get you to place these on a scale, it should be fairly obvious where they go. We have impossible at 0 and certain at 1, even chance right in the middle at 0.5, and then likely and unlikely getting closer to 1 and 0 respectively. These kind of descriptions can apply to something mathematical. So for example, as I say, flipping a coin. We can also talk about it in terms of a non-mathematical event. So for example, will it snow tomorrow? We can place that obviously towards 0, and we can't say it's completely impossible and rule it out, but we can tell you roughly where on the scale an event will be. So what I want you to do is to pause the video. There are 2 questions here with a number of different events. I want you to use our language we've used so far to describe these events on the first question, and on the second question I want you to pick out the outcomes which are impossible. So pause the video now, write these down on your sheet of paper, and then unpause the video ready to mark these with your red pen. Okay, so you should have had a go at these now. I'm going to reveal the answers and you're going to check whether you got these right. So question 1, we've got these ones, and there's only 2 impossible outcomes on question 2, which is rolling a 7 on a fair 6-faced die, and tomorrow being a Tuesday if it is Wednesday. The rest might be likely or unlikely, but they're never going to be impossible. Okay, so what we need to do is to talk about how we can list possible outcomes. So the method for listing outcomes is as follows, and you need to copy these steps down, and then we will apply these steps in the next few questions. So the first step is to list all the possible outcomes of one event. So for example, if we're talking about flipping a coin, the possible outcomes are heads and tails. The second step is to list all the possible outcomes of the second event, so it could be the same thing, for example flipping a coin, or it could be something different such as rolling a die. If it's flipping a coin, it's heads and tails again. If it's rolling a die, we've got the outcomes of 1 to 6 if it's a 6-sided die. The third step is to combine one outcome with each of the second event's outcomes. So what that means is if we're flipping a coin, we're going to combine heads with getting another heads, for example, and getting a tails, or if it's rolling a die, we've got heads and 1, heads and 2, heads and 3, and so on and so forth. Then we're going to combine the second outcome of the first event, that should be event not even, with each of the second event's outcomes, so then we're going to have tails and 1, tails and 2, etc, etc, and that gives us all of our possible outcomes of more than one event taking place. If you haven't finished copying this down, pause the video now, get these steps down into your notes please. Okay, so we're going to have a look at applying these. So we've got a single event here. The possible outcomes, as I said, of rolling a fair 6-sided die are the numbers 1 to 6. Even if it's an unfair 6-sided die, these are still the 6 outcomes, but obviously they're they are not equally likely, so they're all going to have different probabilities, but they're still the 6 outcomes. Flipping a coin, we only have 2 outcomes, which are heads and tails. Okay, so what I want you to do is to list all the possible outcomes of these. There are more than one event happening, so you have to combine the first event with the second event. So I'm going to do the first question for you. If you're feeling confident, you can pause now and have a go at these. If you're not so sure, watch the next question and then have a go at the following questions. So we have one fair coin, which is flipped twice. List all the possible outcomes if we have T for tails and H for heads. So flipping it once, we have the outcome T and H. So I'm just going to put my first trial here. My second event is flipping it again. So my second event, I have tails and heads again. So my events are going to be tails and tails, tails and heads, heads and heads, and then heads and tails. And the important part to note is that these two are actually 2 different things happening. We've got tails first and then heads first and then tails. These aren't the same, they are different, so it does matter what order you put them in. Okay, have a go at the rest of these here then please. Pause the video, 10 minutes in your book. Okay, so you should have had a go at all of these. We're going to get our red pens out again to mark them. So your answers are going to be up on the next slide, I hope. Apparently not. Okay, we'll go through them together. So 2 fair coins are flipped. We've got TT, TH, HH, and HT again. Doesn't matter whether it's 2 coins or 1 coin, we still have the same events. Flips a coin and rolls a fair die. We don't know how many sides this die has, but if we assume it's 6, we're going to have H1, H2, H3, all the way to H6. And then we've also got our T1, T2, T3, all the way to T6. 2 boxes, 1 box of 3 counters, 1 to 3, and 1 box of 3 counters over ABC. 1 counter from box 1, 1 counter from box 2. So we've got 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, and 2C, 3A, 3B, and 3C. Now we've got sporting events. Choose 2 activities with possible outcomes. So if I'm just using letters, I've got FS, FT, FG, RS, RT, RG, and HS, HT, and HG. Now we can see here it's actually becoming easier to list these as a table, so you could just put football here, rugby, and hockey, and you could put swimming, tennis, and gymnastics, and just list the outcomes that way. Similar to here, I'm going to do soup with chicken and trifle, soup with veggie and trifle, soup with veggie and ice cream, soup with lamb and trifle, and so on and so forth. We just list them this way. So as long as you're getting all the combinations, we are confident with that. Okay, so one thing I want to talk about is these are the questions from the last mock paper that Year 11 sat. It talks about the number of different ways of choosing one boy and one girl. Now, because we've got a lot of options for girls and a lot of options for boys, we could write them down as G 16 times and 14 of B, and then combine them and list all the number of outcomes. But I'm going to show you a shortcut into finding a total number of outcomes from here. So, for example, in the first question, we have 2 outcomes for flipping our coin once and 2 outcomes for flipping it twice. The total outcomes was 4. So I'm going to write down the number of total outcomes and the number of possible outcomes for each trial. Once again, we have 2 outcomes and 2 outcomes and 4 total outcomes. We had 2 outcomes for flipping a coin and 6 outcomes for rolling a dice. We ended up with 6 here and 6 here, so we ended up with 12 possible outcomes. We had 3 numbers in one box and 3 letters in another, so we had 3 and 3, and 9 total outcomes, and so on and so forth. So have a look at this now and see whether you can spot a pattern in the number of outcomes for each event and the total number of outcomes, and then use this to apply it to the plenary and see if you can answer the questions here. Now when you finish with this, make sure you take a photo of your notes and upload it to Firefly. Even if you've done all the work, I can't see that you've done it, so I need to be able to see it to tick you off as you complete. And answer the question on the Firefly task. It is in relation to the plenary, so you can have an exit ticket for the lesson. Hope you have a really good rest of your afternoon, Year 10, and enjoy your day.